What I want to do now is I want to introduce to you Major General Thomas Travis, who's the United States Air Force Deputy Surgeon General at the Pentagon, and he's going to talk to you about the U.S. Department of Defense Human Systems Integration Task Force. We don't have the slides, so even better. Yeah. So just do your thing.
Okay.
Forget about the dilemma.
Yeah. Okay. No dilemma. Okay. Good afternoon again. How many people were here Monday for my discussion? Just about everybody. That's good because I want to talk about that a little bit. Can you hear me in the back? Are we good? Excellent. Yeah, Saskia, thank you for the very nice introduction, and you're doing a bang-up job already as the technical director of the course, so very good. Thank you all also for attending this conference. I would also like to add my thanks to Colonel Coakwell and his staff for the first portion of this, the European Flight Surgeons Conference, which frankly I found to be extremely beneficial. I have a hard time these days in the Pentagon being able to just sit in sessions and listen and learn. You know, it's running meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, as I'm sure it is in your headquarters, wherever you might work. So this is a real nice thing for me to sit here with so many people who care about the things that I care about and to learn with you. That the discussions that we've been having, and I really truly appreciated all of them, but this morning's discussion with Colonel Ortega and General Robb also, I think, it kind of sets a stage for this discussion in the next 2 days. We've been talking at various levels, various altitudes, from a very high kind of conceptual level, and some at a more tactical level, but they all feed off of each other. I think many of the people in the room, I know I have, and I know most of you have, cared about human performance, sustainment, and enhancement for some time. But we have to kind of change the paradigm, and that's been our discussion. I won't go through that with you again. To change that paradigm, this has to become more than discussion. It has to become reality. We do this in small bits. We make an impact, as we all have throughout our careers. And as I talked about Monday, you know, 100 years ago it was about survival. Then it was about still somewhat survival and safety. We started trying to introduce the term performance. It wasn't just G-lock. It was about making that aviator more effective in the cockpit, not having to worry about fighting the G. And oh yeah, by the way, he probably won't, he or she won't G-lock either, but they're also going to be more effective doing what they do. So we've been making those kind of impacts. But as you saw in the slides this morning, you know, with the aviators, the number of aviators perhaps coming down, and all these other operators coming up, this really does become about operational support and operational medical support and human performance practice. And I think that's the future. In fact, I'm convinced of it. We're at the crossroads, as you saw this morning, and I think we have to start thinking about the future. We're thinking about that. Many of us have thought about it for a long time. This conference, the one that preceded, and this one, you know, congratulations to those who came up with the theme, because it's on target from my perspective. But how do you take these conceptual discussions and then drive it down into execution and operation? And I think as leaders, that's our job. With that in mind, I'm going to share one part of how we start driving this into the line discussion. We've been very successful so far in doing that in my Air Force and within Department of Defense. And I'm taking off my Air Force hat for this discussion and representing the Department of Defense because I chair this task force, and I'll describe it to you. The other thing that I was going to mention to you is in discussions in the front row. You know, we're old friends, and you don't want to know about most of what we talk about. In fact, you'd be really disappointed. But one of the things that we started talking about Monday was we need to continue this discussion, and not in this venue next year. You know, I would encourage you to pick another topic and move on. But I think this venue and this discussion this week, in concert with many of the other things that have been going on within all of our Air Forces, and I would say within all of our services, for those of you who are not Air Force, I think drive us to try to operationalize this more. You know, it's great to come together, have a discussion about this. We go home charged up thinking, gosh, that's a new way to think about this. And then 2 weeks later, we're back into what we did, what we've been doing, until the next time we're all together, you know, doing this self-licking ice cream cone. I think we have to make a change. So with that, the discussion that we were having earlier this week, I've reached out to the 711th Human Performance Wing, USAF-SAM at Wright-Patt. Colonel Ortega has reached out to the Aerospace Medical Association, the Executive Director, Jeff Sventek, and we have agreement that right before ASMA in 2013, and ASMA is in Chicago next year. I think it's the 9th through the 12th, I believe, or 12th through the 16th of May. Don't quote the dates. That's why I didn't make a slide. I think it's the 12th through the 16th of May. But just for a few days before, probably the end of the prior week at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is 3 or 4 hours of drive and a 40-minute flight, we would invite the nations, anybody who would like to participate, and certainly within the U.S. Department of Defense, all the services will be invited to have a discussion about operationalizing human performance as a way of doing business. For my Air Force, as a leader in my Air Force Medical Service, I can tell you that we're going to drive doctrine discussions, we're going to drive policy discussions, and probably out of that, I would hope that doctrine and policy drives resourcing discussions, structural discussions on how we get ready to take this on as the way we do business in the future. So I would invite, I'll just tell you now that right before Aerospace Medical Association meeting in Chicago next year, we'll invite all of you or anyone else from the nations who would like to attend to come to Wright-Patterson. You'll see this new School of Aerospace Medicine. Some of you will see it in June, which is great. But the USAF-SAM commander and the wing commander there have agreed that this is a great idea, and they're very excited to host such a meeting. So. So out of this meeting, I think we'll grow some very good things. So again, congratulations to the organizers. And I'm sure, Saskia, this part will be just as productive. I'm looking forward to participating. Having said that, next slide. I'm going to talk to you about, and this is, I put this up the other day. I'm not going to talk about this too much again. But in fact, the discussion that I had the other day is, and I told you why I was here talking about this, something I've cared about for a long time. I found myself asked a few years ago to chair a task force for the Department of Defense on human systems integration. It was not my idea. It's not something that I said, gosh, we need to do this, I want to do this, let's create this. This was the Department of Defense who had created a Defense Safety Oversight Council, in fact, to try to lower the mishap rate. And they see it again as mishaps, and I'll walk you through this. But they came to me and said, we think human systems integration, it could actually be a very valuable tool in helping us attack the safety issues we have. I translated that immediately to performance because, frankly, an optimally performing aviator, operator, tank driver, because it is DOD, this is not just aircraft and not just RPAs, it's the whole DOD operational environment, to include the industrial environment at home, to include motor vehicle accidents, to include motorcycle accidents. They recognize that human systems integration could be a good way to talk about this as kind of a cross-cutting capability. I talked about this, and I would tell you again, just kind of by way of trying to operationalize this. I think the environment's right for this. The study that Colonel Ortega and several other people sponsored, this white paper, is the new operational environment, and our line recognizes the need to operate differently and support those that operate differently. This scientific report, which I referred to Monday, the Technology Horizons 2010, the two overarching themes in this document were autonomy and human systems, human performance augmentation. They're driven to some extent by the cost, because if you can do things autonomously, And I thought Colonel Ortega's discussion this morning was on target. You know, you may see two people at a console, but there's a whole lot of people in the back that are doing things, not in the back of the airframe, but scattered throughout the globe that are enabling that capability. They're all humans that need to be supported in this important operational environment. You had this study, which really did emphasize the fact that personnel costs are too high. If you do this with human systems in mind, you can drive the manpower costs down. I think that's true. At the same time, we need to understand better how to integrate humans into systems to make them more effective, and also, of course, to improve capability to do the things, the global responsibilities that we have in defense and security. On top of this, we also had the Secretary Gates, who rechartered this Defense Safety Oversight Council, put out last May his what we call Magnificent Seven. The Magnificent Seven were the research initiatives or the research priorities for the Department of Defense for the next 5 years. Number 7 out of those 7 was human systems. My department, the Department of Defense, has right now a tremendous appetite for understanding better ways to support humans in these systems, better integrate, better support, maybe even augment performance. And I introduced this thought the other day, and I'll leave it with you now, and I think this may be where the audience interaction, or not. We're not doing the audience interaction. We don't have the clickers. I'm personally thrilled we don't have the clickers. Yeah. But as we talk about all of these things, and you've heard this discussion over the last few days, I introduced the thought Monday morning when I spoke to you. Just because we can do something doesn't mean it's legally, morally, ethically appropriate to do so. And so we always have to introduce this ethical filter into what we're considering. And I think the way we're doing war in the future also bears the same scrutiny that was discussed this morning. Just because we can do war autonomously, should we? Now, that's a legal discussion, that's a moral discussion, that's an ethical discussion. I think, however it sorts out, and to whatever degree of autonomy or robotics that we do this, all of us as practitioners of supporting humans and human performance, we will have a role to whatever degree that humans are involved. They're always going to be involved. Next slide. So I mentioned this. The Secretary of Defense on May 30th, 2007 made the comment that, you know, we can no longer afford to have preventable accidents. We're losing treasure, we're losing airframes, we're losing people. And he was frankly very tired of seeing those losses. And as a result, he established, and it was actually his predecessor, Secretary Rumsfeld, that did this in 2004, established a goal of a 50% reduction in preventable mishaps. And I think by that time they set it for 2008 as the goal to do that. They wanted to cut the preventable mishaps in half in 5 years. Maybe a bridge too far. We've actually made a lot of strides in reaching those goals, and I'm not going to show you any of the metrics. In our meetings, we look at those metrics, and we look at them across the board. We look at aviation accidents, we look at motor vehicle accidents, we look at deployed, tracked vehicle accidents, untracked we look at motor, we look at everything. We also look at days missed work within our industrial centers, so we're looking at safety across the board. Secretary Gates, when he became the Secretary, he agreed, rechartered this Defense Safety Oversight Council, and all the task force chairs are a 2-star level, either in uniform or civilian, but they are all focused at the highest level on driving down mishap rates and improving performance survivability. And I agree, we all agree, we have no greater responsibility than to take care of those who volunteer to serve, undoubtedly. Next slide. So the Defense Safety Oversight Council, this is what they do. They make recommendations to the Secretary of Defense, and they have his direct ear to make these recommendations through one of the assistant secretaries to promote and develop implementation of safety initiatives, to improve mission success, and frankly to preserve human and physical resources. Again, there's money savings involved here. And without a doubt, supports the effort to improve human performance. I didn't write these words. This is the Department of Defense. Next slide. We, in fact, a number of ways we do that the level of the individuals at the table, when the full Defense Safety Oversight Committee meets, or Council meets, I have in fact seen the Secretary of Defense at the end of the table. We have his direct ear. The full DSOC Council is in fact the Vice Chief of Staff of each of the service levels. So the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, the Vice Chief Staff of the Army, the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, the Vice Chief Staff of the Air Force, and at the Undersecretary level, the deputies. It's really a deputies meeting. They sit at that table once a year to hear everything. In between, we have a Defense Safety Oversight Council integrating group. That's my level, and that's where the task force chairs all meet and make decisions to present to the full DSOC. One of the other tools we have, and we influence policy at a very high level. What it means is I have, as a task force chair, which is why I didn't say no, even though I had 2 other jobs, I didn't say no to this because I knew I had direct access to the policymakers and the leaders within the Department of Defense to influence their thinking. You don't say no to those opportunities, especially when you've been doing something and care about something so much. But one of the things that we do, another way to influence it, there is a pot of money, and it's not big money, but it's several $1 million a year, where we compete initiatives, each of the task forces, and we actually fund initiatives to try to advance the practice or advance protection or advance policy. We don't do research for those dollars. But we have made some real strides within all of these task forces for safety, which the metrics have proven. But within the Human Systems Integration Task Force, we've invested in some things that have already made a difference, and I'll share a few of those with you. Next slide. Again, the kind of things that we fund, you'll see it on the left. It can't just be service-specific, although some are. They should have applicability across the services and across operations. Joint training programs are really very welcome to invest in. And data analysis that actually helps to support data-driven recommendations to this council for investment or policy decisions. Some things we do don't require any investment, just requires policy. And you can see on the right the things that we don't invest in. Next slide. Next slide. The task forces that are part of this are acquisition and technology programs. So as a result of being one of these task force chairs, you can see me there in red, that's my task force, I get to interact with each of these people. Some of these, for example, private motor vehicle accident reduction is a 2-star chief of safety for the Air Force. The 2-star chief of safety for the Navy is another task force chair. The 1-star chief of safety for the Army is another one of these task force chairs. Installations and environmental secretaries are task force chairs. What it means is, at this table, I can interact across DoD, services and agencies within DoD, to help influence their thinking and impact policy. That's a huge opportunity, and it's another way back to trying to operationalize actually execution of change in the way we do business. This is another way to do it. But you can see the different task forces. Next slide. This is a fresh slide. That's why it says draft. And I didn't put up the specifics of which of these each of these are, but that's acquisition and technology, the red wedge there. They're responsible for almost half of the initiatives that are proposed this year. My task force, which is in blue, is responsible for a significant portion as well. And I'll show you what those are. But we have 39 initiatives that I sat at a table last week to hear about, learn about in a 2-hour meeting, and I've got the vote sheet on my computer now. All of the task force chairs will vote on these initiatives, and many will get funded. We don't have enough to fund all $8 million worth, but we'll fund probably $5 million worth. And some of these initiatives will go on to make an immediate difference in how we approach safety and human performance. Next slide. This is a refresher for those of you who may have forgotten what HSI is. We've been talking about it since Monday. And again, it's the cross-domain. Sitting there as the Deputy Surgeon General, the first question is, gosh, why are you here? And it's because we have responsibility for part of these domains, and we actually are pretty good integrators. On the Air Force side, the Air Force Surgeon General, and me as really, I guess, the guy that owns the money for the Air Force Surgeon General, we fund human systems integration. Not all of it, but a significant part of it. And that gets us in the business of technology and ConOps, and that's not a bad thing. The acquisition folks fund a small office that are actually the acquisition policy. I actually provide officers for that. So these are folks who are board certified in aerospace medicine or smart in aerospace physiology, and they impact, again, Air Force acquisition and interact, of course, with the other services acquisition programs too. Next slide. And I put this slide back up too, and this was in case there was anyone new in the room, but this is what it is. It's selecting right, training right, then make sure the individual's healthy, fit, protected, and integrated, and it's a multi-domain approach where all of these specialties really do collide. Next slide. And reintroducing this thought because it's pertinent, relevant to, again, operationalizing human systems integration in our processes and how we are having a marked effect already in acquisition within DoD, not just Air Force. The Army has a very good man-print program, they call it, which is their HSI program. The Navy has C-print, which is their HSI program. The Air Force now has AirPrint. Here's the theme here. And it's making sure that the human is considered in our acquisition programs, and we try to do it as early as possible, hopefully pre-milestone B, and even better, pre-milestone A, where you're developing the requirement and defining the problem in terms to where whoever is doing the development and then the vendor that provides the system is thinking about the human from day one. But that comes into writing the requirement. If you do that right, you save a lot of money in the end state. Next slide. So, in April of 2008, I get a phone call from the Secretary, it's actually the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel Readiness, who has the oversight responsibility for the DSOC. And their office says, General Travis, we've just stood down a task force. It's not very productive. We really think we could use a human systems integration task force to help us on this DSOC. And the first thing I had to do is ask them what a DSOC was. But then once I did a little bit of research, and my boss was a 4-star, he actually knew what it was. He called me and says, Tom, I think you ought to do this. It's right down your alley, because he knew I cared about this. The Surgeon General called me, General Raudebush, many of you have met, and said, Tom, I think this is something you ought to do. This is something you're made for. And so I accepted it. And in September of 2008, Dr. Chu, who was the Undersecretary of Defense at the time, signed the charter, and we've been in existence ever since. We're actually the newest task force within the DSOC, but we are actually one of the more productive ones, and we're doing some, I think, very important things. We have, this is a living, breathing entity, and as requirements change or the needs shift, we shift working groups, and we've shifted once already within this task force. And in fact, our latest working groups are now the HSI and Joint Capability Integration Development System, the JCIDS process. That's how you really influence joint requirements process. The Applications Working Group, which is more of a direct touch type of working group. And then the Manpower, Personnel, and Training Working Group, and that's chaired, I think, by an Army Colonel now, Lex. Isn't that accurate? Out of TRADOC. And I think that's right. Navy Captain, okay. Next slide. But we have Army very deeply involved out of TRADOC, that's right. Next slide. The purpose of our task force is this. We really are looking for evidence-based strategies to introduce the HSI into our processes. That's policy, that's acquisition, and the vision, as you can see there, there's an inherent safety payoff. This is not just about driving down accident rates. This is more of a long-term payoff. With the HSI approach to this, we know we'll drive down accident rates. You can't prove that. We also know, and if you go back to that money slide with the timeline, in the long term we'll save money. One of the challenges we have, of course, in a fiscally constrained environment, investing early in a program is not something we do automatically. And especially when you're looking for near-term dollar savings, and this comes back to the practical aspects of trying to do these great things that we've been talking about for the last 2 days, and we'll talk about the next 2 days. In a fiscally constrained environment, you have to make this meaningful where, in the current environment. It comes down to money. Upfront investments right now are not very well thought of. We're looking for short-term savings right here. What you have to do is try to prove, and we actually have an initiative now that the Army's leading to try to model the health costs of not integrating a human in a system early. And then if you can start trying to prove, if you can start proving to people, invest now, it's going to save you money later, much as that chart showed. And you can do it in a way that's real, not just fictional or conceptual. You may get people to start investing in this. I had the same discussion with NASA at the Johnson Space Center in December, where if you can invest early or if you can write your requirements right up front, in the long term you save money. And the country's all about, my country, your countries, are all about saving money right now. If you do it cheap on the front, you're going to pay in the end. And you'll pay perhaps in manpower, you'll pay in cost of maintenance, you'll pay in capability, and frankly, you'll pay in mission effectiveness. And perhaps with lives. Invest early, it saves money. Better performance, lower cost. And that's a bumper sticker. Okay. Almost like an ad for a gas station. Next slide. Yeah. We've talked about this already. We have goals within this task force. It's policy improvement. We do that through a series of, we're getting a lot of attention at the table talking about HSI. Involvement left of milestone A, which is how you write that requirement to begin with. And then, as I said, try to find concrete examples of return on investment. And then goal 2 is to expand the practice of HSI and DoD to encompass development and acquisition of the human. Next slide. These are the 3 working groups, and I think I've already talked about this probably enough. Next slide. These are some previous initiatives. I won't read all of them to you, but the top one was one of our first. This is something that we knew, full coverage anti-G trousers, something I've been involved with for a long time. We just couldn't get my Air Force to invest in this for the legacy aircraft. They were investing in this for the F-22. They're investing in this for the F-35. But we have a significant G-lock problem still, and that means performance problem in F-16s. But we were not putting full coverage G trousers in the F-16. We took some off-the-shelf products, demonstrated them for very little money to Air Combat Command, wrote a report, and guess what? We're buying full coverage G trousers for the F-16. And if we hadn't had this task force make that investment, DSOC interest, that decision, we've been trying to get that decision for 15 years. So it took me a long time, but we finally got the right decision, and I had to get to the 2-star level and sit at a table at the Pentagon to do it. But that's okay. That's why you hang around. Okay? Many of you will hang around and make those decisions, I hope. Preventable noise exposure is another good example. Less tactical, more acquisition related. We actually developed something that makes it easy for those who are writing requirements to put in noise exposure right up front. And not just decibel levels. I mean, you give them the right language, and also you give contractors tools to understand that you can prevent noise. And we have a huge compensation program for noise loss within our forces. You do too, I bet. I think it's $1 billion a year that we compensate people for noise loss or hearing loss. You could buy a lot of something with $1 billion a year. So you invest up front to drop the noise in the aircraft to begin with, not just better earplugs. And that's a better way to go about this business. Instead of, again, fixes or mitigation later or compensation later where you've impacted people's lives and perhaps their livelihood, you do it way up front, drive the noise down or the vibration down. We're working on vibration this year as one initiative. This is how you impact future systems development. That vibration in that system that you guys were talking about this morning, unbelievable to me. And this last one is actually a demonstration and this is an academic initiative with the University of Texas in Arlington, Texas, trying to figure out, and this is tough, nonlinear causal relationship analysis. You don't have to be perfectly performing all the time. There are pockets of time where your performance has to be higher. It's not a direct linear relationship, and it drives a little bit towards the discussions we've had this morning. Dr. Steinkraus, you might be very interested in this. As we develop this more, we'll share it with you. But I think it kind of gets to, it's hard to draw the line at a standard and say that this person can meet the need all the time. It's not that simple. So we're exploring this, and DSOC funded it. Next slide. Some of the initiatives we've just submitted, not all of them will be successful, but we think a few will. Role of communications and mishaps, that's an analysis the Hearing Center of Excellence would like to do. Same with the next one. HSI and JSID's guidance, I've already mentioned that one. much like we've done the hearing one, and that has gotten rave reviews from across not just DoD but industry. We've gotten a lot of the disc, the website, the booklet, incredible reviews. We're going to do one for vibration now. And I think this one is going to be funded. I'm pretty sure it will. I'm not sure about the first two. Ground vehicle based vehicle accident avoidance. We've had a significant problem with rollovers and mishaps and MRAPs. The mine-resistant vehicles. We need to learn from that and then figure out, how we design systems in the future that don't do this. Unfortunately, the shape of that vehicle, it lends itself to rolling over, and we'll see. I don't know whether that one will succeed or not. And then finally, and this bottom one seems simple enough, but we really haven't measured dosimetry within the hearing exposure within the ear is different than kind of a controlled environment measuring the decibel level. And we think this could be a game changer, and it's actually a way to ruggedize and demonstrate this dosimetry in the operational environment. We may learn a lot we do not know. And again, I'm hoping this one is successful, but we'll see. Next slide. Next. Somewhere next in every system is a human. Next. And with that, I'll conclude early. Any questions? Okay, I told you the other day this one's not quite as exciting, but it is, in fact, it's great and exciting to talk about concepts. This is how you start turning things into reality. And so with your help, we'll take this on and try to take this to the next step, perhaps at Wright-Patterson in May of 2013. But I can guarantee you have our commitment. We're going to continue down this road because I think the operational demand is there. The environment is ripe with the Science and Technology report, with Secretary Gates' Magnificent Seven investment strategy, which includes human systems, and frankly, the operational imperatives, the operational issues we've seen with platforms such as the F-22 and the U-2. We have to go down this road to better design systems and support humans in the future. So thanks again for the invitation to be here. It's my pleasure, and thank you very much.